I remember a time when being liked felt effortless, when conversations flowed easily and laughter came without effort. I didn't have to lean forward or pull back. I just existed, and that seemed to be enough. People told me I was easy to be around, and I believed them. There was comfort in that ease, a kind of warmth that settled into everyday moments. It showed up in casual greetings, shared jokes, invitations that arrived without needing to be asked for. Nothing felt conditional then, or at least it didn't feel that way yet. Over time, I noticed how certain parts of myself were welcomed more than others. Not in obvious ways, not with rules or warnings, just in what lingered and what didn't. Some conversations stretched on, while others quietly folded in on themselves. I learned early which topics were met with nods and which ones drifted into silence. I didn't think much of it at first, because silence can look like politeness if you're not listening closely. And I wasn't listening closely yet. I remember telling myself that not every thought needed to be shared. That restraint was a kind of maturity, a social grace I was learning to practice. It felt responsible, even generous, to keep certain things to myself. People still smiled, they still laughed, they still said I was thoughtful, grounded, calm. Those words felt like approval, and approval feels a lot like belonging when you want it to. There was a moment when I realized how much of myself I was editing, but I couldn't name it yet. I only knew that before speaking, I paused longer than I used to. Not because I was unsure, but because I was measuring. I began choosing words carefully, smoothing their edges before they ever left my mouth. I framed observations as questions, concerns as curiosities, truths as passing thoughts. It wasn't fear that guided me, just a quiet instinct to keep things comfortable. Comfort became the goal, without anyone ever saying it was. I could feel it in the way rooms stayed relaxed when I stayed light. I could feel it in how easily conversations moved on when I didn't press. Over time, something shifted, and I became aware of how often I was being described rather than heard. "You're so calm," they'd say, or "you're different." I never asked different from what. I didn't mind those words at first. They felt harmless, even kind, but they followed me closely, like reminders of how I was expected to remain. There was a gathering, I remember, clearly, more clearly than the others, because of how ordinary it seemed at first. The room was softly lit, not bright, but not dark either. The kind of lighting meant to make everyone look relaxed. The air was cool enough to notice, and chairs were arranged just close enough that personal space felt shared. Someone asked a question, casually, without much weight attached to it. I answered just as casually, my voice steady, my posture unchanged. It wasn't a challenge, and it wasn't loud. The hum of the room didn't stop, but it shifted. A chair creaked as someone leaned back. Someone else glanced down at their hands, as if checking something they hadn't noticed before. No one interrupted me, and no one raised their voice. The reaction was quieter than that. The space simply tightened, like a breath held just a second too long. I felt it immediately, not as rejection, but as distance. The warmth didn't leave the room, it just moved away from me. And that was when I understood that something had changed, even though nothing dramatic had happened. After that, conversations didn't disappear, they just became shorter. Laughter still came, but it arrived later, softer. Invitations still existed, but they felt more carefully timed. No one said I was wrong. No one accused me of anything. The shift lived entirely in tone and timing. Words like serious started appearing where thoughtful used to be. Someone joked that I'd gotten intense, even though nothing about my voice had changed. I smiled when they said it, because smiling felt easier than asking what they meant. I noticed how quickly ease returned when I stayed quiet again. The room relaxed, the air softened, people leaned back in. There was a temptation in that moment, gentle but persistent. It suggested that silence could restore what honesty had unsettled, that I could return to being liked if I chose comfort over clarity. I considered it more than once. I weighed how smooth things could be if I went back to nodding along, to letting certain things pass without comment. It didn't feel like giving up, just like choosing peace. But over time, I realized that peace built on erasure isn't really peace. It's just quiet. And quiet can be lonely when it isn't chosen freely. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't make speeches or draw lines in the room. I simply stopped shrinking moments before they happened. That choice didn't make things louder. It made them clearer. And clarity has a way of rearranging who stays close. Some people drifted, not abruptly, but decisively. Their absence wasn't dramatic, just noticeable. Others stayed, fewer in number, but steadier in presence. I learned then that acceptance can feel generous until it asks for silence in return. That being welcomed is not the same as being known. And that knowing yourself sometimes costs the comfort of blending in. There are still rooms where I feel that old instinct rise, that pause before speaking. It hasn't disappeared, but now I recognize it, and recognition changes things. I understand now that truth doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes quietly and still changes everything. Sometimes it costs nothing but ease and still feels expensive. This story isn't about conflict or confrontation. It's about the quiet negotiations we make with ourselves in spaces that feel almost safe, almost welcoming, almost whole. Many people recognize this feeling without ever naming it. In classrooms, in workplaces, in friendships that feel conditional. The pattern is familiar, even when the setting changes. They loved me as long as I was quiet, and when I wasn't, they didn't argue, they simply stepped back. That distance taught me more than any argument ever could. What remained was smaller, but it was real, and real has a weight that comfort never did. This was Voices Unseen Quietly Real, Episode 3, and there are more true stories coming soon. If you liked this story, listen to another one. And if you'd like to hear more like this in the future, you're welcome to subscribe and return whenever you need a quiet place to listen.